We're also going to take a look at an article which would be genuinely funny if it wasn't so tragic, from the Chronicle of a couple of weeks ago, talking about these channels, people who profess to be vehicles for spirits of the dead to come back and advise the living. As I say, the article, and I apologize ahead of time if I break out laughing in certain places in this article, because it really, if it wasn't so sad, it would be hilarious. And then we're going to conclude the broadcast this evening by once again comparing the occult climate and the cult climate of today, with all of this New Age hocus-pocus being in vogue, with the psychosocial climate of Weimar Germany. That's what we have on tap for this evening, so hold on to your hats. And as I said, if you are not already doing so, please tape this broadcast, because I think you're going to find it will be very, very useful, albeit in a rather disturbing way in the future. Now, this first article, research credit goes to Mae Brussel. This article was not in my copy of the San Francisco Examiner. It is from the San Francisco Examiner of November 2nd of 1987. That's last Monday. When Mae Xeroxed this for me, she didn't Xerox off part of the title. The title of the article says something, "To Observers, Presidio Satanist, a Scary Enigma." And the article is by Ivan Sharp, and it's a special to the Examiner. Again, I don't have the whole title, but it's from the San Francisco Examiner of November 2nd, 1987. That's a Monday. It's by Ivan Sharp, S-H-A-R-P-E, a special to the Examiner. Most of the title reads, "To Observers, Presidio Satanist, a Scary Enigma." It's not the full title, so again, be aware of that for those of you who would eventually look this up in a library. The article reads, "His pale face and eyebrows that stab upward like the horns of the devil and shiny black hair shaped into a prominent widow's peak over his forehead make Michael Aquino," that's spelled A-Q-U-I-N-O, just like Corazon Aquino, make Michael Aquino look more like a 1930s actor playing Dracula than what he claims to be, Satan's earthly lieutenant, the Prince of Darkness. He was a wacko to many who saw him at the Presidio Officers Club wearing a black shirt and clerical collar with a satanic medallion around his neck. To those who know Lieutenant Colonel Aquino as one of the Army's experts on psychological warfare, he is more of a scary enigma. Let me read that last sentence again. To those who know Lieutenant Colonel Aquino as one of the Army's experts on psychological warfare, he is more of a scary enigma. Police, the FBI, and the Army have long been curious about the activities of the high priest of the Satanic Temple of Set, a man who believes he is the second beast of Revelation. The August 14th police search of his Russian Hill home, in connection with the Presidio child abuse case, gave a more serious tilt to the Aquino mystery. Aquino and his wife Lilith, a former New York coven leader of the Church of Satan, have not been arrested since the 3.5-year-old stepdaughter of a Presidio assistant chaplain identified the couple as the Mikey and Shamby who allegedly molested and photographed her in a black-walled room with a cross on the ceiling. And again, I'll repeat part of that sentence. Aquino's wife Lilith, a former New York coven leader of the Church of Satan. Potentially a very important connection, and we'll talk about that at the end of the article. Continuing. However, authorities confirm that there is an investigation and that the Aquinos are still suspects. Until last July, he was a full-time student, skipping down in the article, by the way. Until last July, he was a full-time student at the Pentagon's National Defense University in the District of Columbia. That is considered a distinction for a reserve officer. Quote, "The United States just paid me the highest honor it could by sending me to that post, and then to return to my home and have the police raid happen to me is just unbelievable and outrageous," unquote, Aquino said in a telephone interview. By all accounts, Aquino apparently has had a dazzling Army career. He was a psychological warfare officer in Vietnam, earning the Bronze Star, Air Medal, and Army Commendation Medal. He also qualified in the Airborne, Special Forces, and Intelligence fields, graduating on the Commandant's list from the Command and General Staff College, and wrote ROTC textbooks. He retired from the regular Army in 1972 to try his hand as a stockbroker, but returned to active duty as a reserve officer a few years later. Aquino now is a staff officer with a top-secret clearance at the Army Reserve Personnel Center in St. Louis after serving 5 years at the Presidio coordinating active-duty tours and reserve training. I'll read that last sentence again. Aquino now is a staff officer with a top-secret clearance at the Army Reserve Personnel Center in St. Louis after serving 5 years at the Presidio coordinating active-duty tours and reserve training. Quote, "He is a competent, capable officer," unquote, said Colonel Ben Waller, a 6th Army spokesman, when questioned last year about the Army's probes of Aquino and his Temple of Set. Set, by the way, is S-E-T. A San Francisco police query prompted an Army review of his top-secret clearance. However, confidential Army documents show that not only was Aquino's status reaffirmed, but that he was promoted from major to lieutenant colonel a year before he left the Presidio in July of 1986 to study in the district. The Army says Aquino's devilish appearance and weird fantasies are protected by the First Amendment. Quote, "We're dealing with a man's religious beliefs, and if that's the way he wants to practice them, that's up to him," Waller said. However, city police intelligence memos obtained by the Examiner indicate that as long ago as 1981, authorities were noting the Temple of Set's obsession with Hitler's Nazis, that Aquino claimed to be reporting directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that a number of Temple of Set Satanists were in military intelligence. Let me repeat this last sentence again also. However, city police intelligence memos obtained by the Examiner indicate that as long ago as 1981, authorities were noting the Temple of Set's obsession with Hitler's Nazis, that Aquino claimed to be reporting directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that a number of Temple of Set Satanists were in military intelligence. Aquino proudly shows visitors to his Leavenworth Street home a ritual dagger once owned by a World War II SS general, and boasts about a ritual he performed in the Hall of the Dead at Wewelsburg Castle in West Germany during a 1982 tour of European NATO bases. During World War II, the Westphalian Castle was an occult sanctuary for Himmler's SS elite. Skipping down. Even his admirers and some former Temple of Set members admit that Aquino has some odd quirks. He once urged the Pentagon, in a controversial psychological warfare study entitled Mind War, to overwhelm enemies by mobilizing every means of domestic and foreign propaganda, including brainwashing the U.S. public. He argued, quote, "In mind war, there is no substitute for victory," unquote. Aquino explained, again quoting, "The mind war scenario, which could be used sensationally in a couple of contexts, was a theoretical paper which was circulated within military academic circles. The mind war paper is not a product of Satanism. It's not a product of the temple. It's a military and psychological question," unquote. And again, skipping down, at the very least, Aquino, who until last year taught political science at Golden Gate University, he holds a doctorate in the subject from UC Berkeley, and once was national commander of the Eagle Scout Society, is seen as an eccentric who never outgrew his childhood fantasies. And again, I'm going to repeat that last sentence. That's intriguing that, well, I won't repeat it, but just take note of the fact that Aquino taught political science at Golden Gate University. Again, skipping down, Aquino's satanic fantasies were first stirred in 1968, when as a newly commissioned second lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division, he went to see Mia Farrow being ravished by Satan in the movie Rosemary's Baby. By chance, the show was attended by a sinister-looking, shaven-headed man wearing a black cloak, Anton Szandor LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan and technical advisor to Roman Polanski, the movie's producer. Again, I'm going to repeat that last sentence because we're going to go into the Polanski connection at some length here. By chance, the show was attended by a sinister-looking, shaven-headed man wearing a black cloak, Anton Szandor LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan and technical advisor to Roman Polanski, the movie's producer. The man's name, by the way, Szandor is S-Z-A-N-D-O-R, LaVey is capital L-A, capital V-E-Y. Continuing with the article. Aquino became a devoted Church of Satan priest at a time when LaVey was performing elaborate black masses using naked women as altars in his black-painted San Francisco home. Aquino and other priests split from the Church of Satan in 1975 because LaVey began selling priestly promotions. Aquino realized with horror that LaVey did not really believe in the devil, so in a diabolical coup, Aquino ousted LaVey as the devil's lieutenant and assumed the powers of the Prince of Darkness. Well, there are a number of very important things to bite on in this article. First of all, the fact that Aquino's wife Lilith is described here as a former New York coven leader of the Church of Satan is intriguing. If indeed she was a prominent New York Satanist, there's a very strong possibility that she intersects with one of the various wings of the process. Now, the process is the satanic Nazi umbrella cult, which is implicated very strongly in not only the David Berkowitz killings, the Son of Sam killings in New York, but also the depredations of the Manson family out here in California. And again, it remains to be seen indeed whether Lilith hooks up with the process people in New York, but there's a strong possibility. Bear in mind that the process, as we described, has explicit Nazi trappings and ideology, among other things, and then the Satanism is still a further derivation of this, as we're going to look at as a strong intersection between satanic philosophy and Nazism, and it remains to be seen, and I think should be investigated, whether or not Lilith intersects with the New York process people. Now, another thing that's very, very interesting here is the fact that Aquino, in addition to being obviously very, very highly connected, he has a top secret clearance. He is described here as having reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, coordinated a number of different positions, or occupied a number of different positions within the U.S. national security establishment. His specialty is psychological warfare and intelligence work. Now, one of the things that we had speculated about in our discussions of the process attendant on the ultimate evil was that we'd speculated about the process, quote-unquote, essentially being another one of our national security establishment's mind control programs. The Satanism, again, being a cover for more mundane activities, albeit horrible activities. We also speculated about many of the grisly activities of the Satanists, drinking blood, mutilating and sacrificing animals and people, as being analogous to, and perhaps a further development of, the military's programs of programming people to kill by exposing them to increasing levels of violence. In Radio Free America number 5, we took a look at the habit of the national security establishment of taking people to be trained as assassins and showing them movies of people being mutilated in accidents or circumcision rites in aboriginal cultures, and gradually acclimating them to greater and greater degrees of violence and bloodshed. One of the things that we speculated about in connection with the process is that indeed the process represented just such an insidious mind control front. Aquino's background here in psychological warfare and intelligence certainly would indicate that that assessment is not necessarily inaccurate, shall we say. And again, I will repeat something that I said last week. I have no doubt whatsoever that there are many, many people within our national security establishment who would find this kind of activity horrifying and disgusting and wouldn't stand for it for a minute. As we're going to see, it's equally obvious, though, that there are people who are not at all disturbed by this kind of activity, and that's something we're going to go into at considerable length. Now, we should take note of the fact that there are reports that, as it says here, a number of Temple of Set Satanists were in military intelligence, because child molestation is apparently becoming rampant at Army daycare centers around the country and around the world. The Army has more daycare centers than anyone else in this country, and apparently child molestation is a growing and ongoing problem there. We're going to take a look at that, and one of the things that we should hearken back, again, as we looked at with regard to the process, the Nazi satanic occult cover for the Manson family and David Berkowitz activities, among others, that among the things they were into was kiddie porn, sexual rituals involving children and young women, as well as prostitution, drug dealing, murder for hire, and other activities. The consideration here that there may be other Temple of Set Satanists in military intelligence is worth thinking about against the background of child molestation at U.S. military bases. Now, the explicit Nazi connections here are obviously very disturbing. We're going to talk about the occult origins of Nazism later in the broadcast, and specifically we're going to go into some specific angles of the Nazi occult connections and ones that are very relevant here. One of the things that we're going to focus on right now concerns the connection of the Temple of Set with Anton Szandor LaVey. Now, recall that Michael Aquino got his start as a Satanist by being a devotee of Anton Szandor LaVey's Church of Satan. Then eventually he broke with Anton Szandor LaVey, who interestingly enough was described as not really believing in Satan. Recall that vis-a-vis the process, that's one of the things we had said in the past, is that Satanism here is really more of a cover. Occult groups have long been used by intelligence services, and one wonders, given some of LaVey's connections, whether or not he really himself is working for the intelligence community. Aquino, however, who we know is a military intelligence specialist and psychological warfare specialist, has indeed assumed the mantle of the San Francisco branch of Szandor LaVey's organization. And again, the Temple of Set, a spin-off of the LaVey organization. Now, one of the interesting things here is that Aquino met by chance, he says. I question whether it was really a chance meeting. He met Anton Szandor LaVey when both happened to be viewing a movie about Satan named Rosemary's Baby. Now, in that movie, basically, the character played by Mia Farrow gets impregnated by Satan in an occult ritual, and that basically gives rise to the Antichrist, etc., etc. And the movie was produced by Roman Polanski, and in this section here, Anton Szandor LaVey is described as the advisor to Roman Polanski for the film. Now, this is intriguing here because this also presents a hard intersection with the Temple of Set milieu with the milieu involved in the Manson killings in Southern California. And again, in The Ultimate Evil, the Manson family is indeed a branch of the Process umbrella cult. It should be noted that the Process has fed very successfully off of other occult groups and, quote, New Age activities, unquote, and the Process should be thought of as an umbrella organization, something which encompasses a lot of other subdivisions, so to speak. We're going to take a look at some of the intersections of Roman Polanski's milieu with Satanism and occult-type activities right now. Again, we're going to take a look at the book The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry, Terry, published in hardcover by, and we'll get this here in a second, by Dolphin Books, a subsidiary of Doubleday and Company, copyright 1987. And the first section here, we're going to take a look again at Roman Polanski and some of his intersections with showbiz people and with Nazism. And bear in mind here that Anton Szandor LaVey is one of the people who was intersecting at the same time with Roman Polanski. He was advising Polanski in 68. 69, the Manson killings went down. We're going to talk about those in a second. Again, reading from The Ultimate Evil by Maury Terry. Among his many credits, Polanski directed the famous devil epic Rosemary's Baby for Paramount Pictures. Paramount's vice president of production, Robert Evans, who later was caught in a cocaine bust, was deeply involved in the film, deeply involved with the film and became closely acquainted with Polanski. At the time Rosemary's Devil Child was born, 67 and 68, Evans was back in Hollywood from a London assignment as head of Paramount's European production team. In Beverly Hills, Evans, Polanski, and Sharon Tate were friendly with John Phillips, songwriter and lead singer of the Mamas and Papas rock group. A decade later, Phillips would be an occasional visitor at the home of his friend Keith Richards, hidden away in Satanville. Phillips himself was leasing a house nearby in Connecticut at this time. He's talking about Keith Richards' home in Connecticut. Earlier in the book, in fact, a couple of paragraphs up, Keith Richards' intersection with a woman named Anita Pallenberg, intersection here should be taken quite literally, also implicates not necessarily Keith Richards personally, but his milieu with Satanism. Anita Pallenberg was reliably reported to be a student of the, quote, black arts, unquote. And again, talking about the Polanski milieu and its intersection with satanic activities in the Process cult, continuing here with Maury Terry's account. Phillips' late 60s relationship with Polanski and Tate was an intimate one. He was frequently in their company and was entertained in their rented Benedict Canyon home at 10050 Cielo Drive, scene of oncoming slaughter, on several occasions. In fact, both Phillips and Polanski have acknowledged that Polanski, while married to Tate, conducted a brief affair in London with Phillips' wife Michelle, who also sang with the Mamas and Papas. This liaison transpired several months before Sharon Tate and 4 others were butchered by Charles Manson's killers in August of 1969. Because of his affair with Michelle, Polanski at first suspected an angry John Phillips was involved in the murders to the point of holding a knife to his throat before slinging it into a wall. Ironically, Phillips has admitted to a passing acquaintance with Manson himself, to whom he was introduced by drummer Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys. Manson and some followers even lived at Wilson's Sunset Boulevard estate for a time in 1968, before the friendship soured. Wilson subsequently occupied a slot on Manson's enemies list. I would interrupt, Dennis Wilson is now dead, having drowned, allegedly drunk, in 1983, I believe it was. Interestingly enough, we took a look not only at Wilson's death, but his intersection with Charlie Manson, but also the intersection of another member of the Mamas and Papas, the late Cass Elliot, with that other group. And again, an awful lot of the people who intersected with this group are no longer around. Manson moved easily in show business, returning now to The Ultimate Evil. Manson moved easily in show business circles and developed a close relationship with Terry Melcher, son of singer-actress Doris Day and the producer of her TV show and other ventures. Melcher, to Manson's great interest, was also a record producer, and Charlie was determined to make it big as a singer. He was anxious to ingratiate himself with Melcher, from whom Roman Polanski sublet 10050 Cielo Drive. That again, interrupting, that's the place where the Tate killings took place. Melcher, too, was acquainted with John Phillips, returning to The Ultimate Evil. Melcher, too, was acquainted with John Phillips. And in tune with Phillips' association with Manson, author Ed Sanders reported that he uncovered information indicating Manson attended a 1968 New Year's Eve party at Phillips' Los Angeles home. Phillips, Sanders also said, apparently referred members of the Process to a Los Angeles real estate operator named Artie Aarons in 1968, when the English occultists were seeking to pitch tent in that city. Sanders obtained this information from Jonathan DePeyer, D-E capital P-E-Y-E-R, known as Father Christian to his fellow processans. There were also stories about which held that Phillips contributed some cash to the process, with the reported amounts ranging from the $10 Phillips said he gave to, quote, some cult dressed in black, unquote, to a figure much higher. In any case, Father Christian said that with Phillips' recommendation, Artie Aarons found lodging for a process contingent at a large home he managed at 1882 South Cochran in Los Angeles. Neither Sanders nor I, that's Maury Terry speaking here, imply that Phillips was directly affiliated with the process. From all indications, his interests, by his own account, were elsewhere, music and drugs. But the interweavings and connections among people and events in the Son of Sam and Manson cases are provocative, especially in light of Manson II's alleged involvement in the 44 killings, the further contention that Charlie Manson belonged to the same satanic organization Berkowitz later joined, and the North Salem cult link to the Sam case. That's North Salem, Connecticut, which was one of the areas in Connecticut of process and satanic/Nazi activity. And again, I think the really important connections to focus on here are the probable intelligence connections and the Nazi connections. As grisly and startling as the satanic links are, again, remember, that appears to be a combination of a cover and a brutalizing process for the people to be used at the operational level. Still later in The Ultimate Evil, more of the intersection of the Roman Polanski milieu with the processins and occult and satanic activities is described. And again, this against the background of Anton Szandor LaVey's association with Polanski and his subsequent association with Aquino, the founder of the Temple of Set. Returning to The Ultimate Evil. Investigating, Sanders heard only silence from those said to have attended the party. That's a party where some drug dealers were whipped, and we'll see about that in a second. Investigating, Sanders heard only silence from those said to have attended the party, whose roster apparently included John Phillips. But actor Dennis Hopper, quoted by an L.A. newspaper, did comment publicly on the matter. Quote, "They had fallen into sadism and masochism and bestiality, and they recorded it all on videotape, too. The L.A. police told me this. I know that 3 days before they were killed, 25 people were invited to that house for a mass whipping of a dealer from Sunset Strip who'd given them bad dope." Unquote. The party was held to honor French film director Roger Vadim, who was then married to actress and anti-war activist Jane Fonda. But at what point in the proceedings the alleged whipping taping occurred is unknown. However, Sanders reported that Sebring did bring undeveloped film to a photo lab on Wednesday, August 6th, and the Polanski maid was off the night before. The party, then, apparently occurred on Tuesday night, the 5th. On the night of the killings, as noted previously, a man named Joel Rostau, R-O-S-T-A-U, the boyfriend of an employee of Sebring's, that's Jay Sebring, one of the victims of the Sharon Tate massacre, delivered some drugs to 10050 Cielo Drive. Rostau would be murdered in New York about 15 months later, and another of Sebring's associates would be slain in Florida about a month after that. And again, we can add those two people to the hit list that we dealt with in the last section of our work with The Ultimate Evil. Continuing. The name of that game was Narcotics, not Helter Skelter. And then there was the subject of witchcraft, black hoods, and leather aprons. While it should be recalled that Frykowski and Folger were in temporary residence at Cielo Drive, it is known that British warlock Alex Saunders, who participated in a film Sharon Tate shot in England before her marriage, said he initiated Sharon into witchcraft. Saunders, who said he studied under master black magician Aleister Crowley himself, was connected to OTO and other cult activity in Britain. It is not known if he was involved with the process there, but Alex Saunders said he possessed photos of Sharon standing inside a ritual magic circle. Police denied that black hoods and leather aprons were found in the loft above the living room at 10050 Cielo Drive. However, Ed Sanders told me in July of 1985 that FBI sources informed him those items were indeed there, along with an inverted ace of spades, unquote, said to be a form of cultic life sign. Doris Tate, Sharon's mother, also said that a white cape was found in the house. And skipping down on the article, in the book The Ultimate Evil, in a 1987 interview with an associate of mine, Manson added a twist to the narcotics motive. "Don't you think those people deserve to die? They were involved in kiddie porn," he alleged, but didn't say just who in the Tate LaBianca case he was referring to. And again, I think it's worth repeating here that, as indicated elsewhere in the book, The Ultimate Evil, Manson was simply acting on orders. Again, from that book, the reason for this interest in the California and New York Connections case is simple. According to Vinny, that's one of the prison informants who helped break the story, according to Vinny, Manson, too, was involved with the original Charles Manson. And more than that, Vinny said, quote, "When Manson had the Tate murders done, he was not just doing it out of some helter-skelter fantasy. That was part of it. He believed in that expletive deleted. But there was a real motive, Berkowitz told me. He said Manson was working for somebody else when those crimes were committed. He said Manson, quote, volunteered to do the killings for somebody else," unquote. And again, one of the things that we've spoken about here is the probability that there was much, much more to the killing of Sharon Tate and the others, Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, Wojciech Frykowski, and others, than simply Satanism or anything else, although that may very well have been a part of it. Recall that Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were instrumental in managing Robert Kennedy's campaign in the Los Angeles area. The night before Robert Kennedy was assassinated, he confided to them that he was going to wait till he was elected to break open his brother's murder. He was going to reopen the murder of President Kennedy. That, of course, was not to be, and indeed, Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, had he been around, would not have been around very much longer to tell that tale. Sharon Tate certainly will never tell it. One wonders whether Roman Polanski is feeling a wee bit intimidated at this stage of the game also. It's worth noting here the connection of reported British warlock Alex Saunders, and again, I don't believe in witchcraft at all, however, these people do, and that's the important part, to a guy named Aleister Crowley. We're going to be talking about Aleister Crowley a little later in the broadcast, and although he does not directly link up with Nazism, the occult groups, the satanic groups he was involved with, do link up with some of the same figures that gave rise to some of the Nazi occult groups, such as the Thule Gesellschaft. That's for a little later in the discussion. Now, one of the aspects of the San Francisco Examiner article about Michael Aquino and the Temple of Set that's most disturbing is the indication that, as that article said, other military intelligence people may be in the Temple of Set. One of the things we talked about last week, and we've also touched back on it here, was that kiddie porn and the making and the filming of kiddie porn appears to have been one of the activities of the Process umbrella cult. And the Process, by the way, is very closely affiliated with elements of Aleister Crowley's OTO. We're going to go into Crowley here in a little bit. An article in the San Jose Mercury News from Wednesday morning, November 4th of 1987, goes into the rash of child molestation cases being reported at Army daycare centers. And again, I think this should be examined against the background of information that other Temple of Set people, again, have backgrounds in military intelligence. Again, from the San Jose Mercury of Wednesday morning, November 4th, 1987, it's by Linda Goldston of the Mercury News, Goldston. It's headlined, Presidio Care Center First to Face Army Scrutiny. Stung by charges of sex abuse at more than 1 of every 10 of its daycare centers worldwide, the U.S. Army will begin a review of each daycare center it runs, beginning with the controversial Presidio of San Francisco operation. A special 16-member team from the Pentagon arrived Tuesday in San Francisco. As many as 60 children who attended the Presidio Center allegedly were sexually abused. A former daycare worker has been charged with abusing 10 children, and San Francisco police say they also are investigating possible involvement of a high-ranking Army officer who founded a satanic church. Although it may be one of the strangest, the Presidio case is only one in a string of sex abuse allegations at Army daycare centers. Since 1984, sex abuse cases have been reported at 26 of the 242 Army daycare centers throughout the world, including the U.S. Military Academy at West Point and Fort Dix in New Jersey. The Mercury News reported in August that parents from the Presidio and West Point believe the Army was trying to cover up sex abuse instead of making its daycare centers safe for children. A high-ranking congressional source Tuesday said special review teams will be sent to all Army daycare centers, including the one at Fort Ord near Monterey. No cases of sex abuse have been reported at Fort Ord. Quote, the Presidio is the first of what is to be an all-out effort to review all of the Army daycare centers, said the source who asked not to be named. The centers will be given 90 days to correct deficiencies or face closing. The Army, quote, has made this commitment to review each and every child care center, and we're going to make them stick to it, unquote, the source said, adding the Army, quote, can no longer say that West Point was an isolated case. At West Point, by the end of 1984, at least 50 children who had attended the daycare center there had been interviewed by investigators. A $110 million civil suit brought by parents of 11 children is pending against the Army. Presidio spokesman Bob Mahoney wouldn't discuss the review on Tuesday. There is a team coming from the Department of the Army, he said. That's all I know at this point. And again, much of this is to be put in our category of food for thought and grounds for further research, but I think one of the things we should think about as we look at the rash of reported child molestation at the Presidio is the possible connection, the report that other military intelligence people were in the Temple of Set. And again, the intersection between Anton LaVey and Michael Aquino in the Temple of Set, and in turn, the intersection of Anton LaVey with the whole Polanski milieu in Southern California is worth bearing in mind here. Apparently, child molestation and Satanism is a growing association in the United States, and the cases in the military are anything but isolated. Reading from the San Francisco Chronicle of Thursday, November 5th of 1987, it's an article by Edward W. Lempinen, Lempinen. Its headline, Satanism linked to scores of U.S. child abuse cases. Satanism and cult rituals have been linked to scores of child molestation cases nationwide in the past 5 years, including dozens in California. Children as young as 2 and 3 years old have come forward with harrowing tales of drinking blood, animal sacrifices, and sexual abuse as part of rituals, according to law enforcement investigators, child abuse experts, and parents. Others have even talked of cannibalism and ritual sacrifice of children. After hearing similar tales over and over from people across the country, many investigators and child abuse experts now have come to believe in the unbelievable. It's a highly explosive issue, said Roberta Sachs, S-A-C-H-S, a psychologist at Rush Presbyterian St. Luke's Medical Center in Chicago, who has given therapy to dozens of people apparently abused in cults. Quote, it's filled with atrocities comparable to and greater than some of the concentration camp stories we have heard of. There has been every kind of imaginable and unimaginable torture, unquote. That phrase, I think, is worth repeating against the background of the explicit Nazi leanings of not only the process, but the Temple of Set as well. It's filled with atrocities comparable to and greater than some of the concentration camp stories we have heard of. There has been every kind of imaginable and unimaginable torture, unquote. In San Francisco, police confirmed last week that they are investigating reports by a 3-year-old girl who claimed that she was taken from a daycare center at the Presidio Army base and driven to a home where she was molested by 2 men in costumes. Police suspect that the home was the headquarters of the Temple of Set, a Nazi satanic group, and they have listed the temple's high priest as a possible suspect. No arrests have been made. Investigators and parents have declined to give details of the cases of at least 58 children who attended the Presidio Child Development Center, fearing that they might jeopardize the prosecution of a former daycare worker. But in other cases across the nation, experts say there is striking evidence of ritualized sexual abuse that recurs in case after case. At West Point, New York, Army families have pressed an investigation into widespread child abuse at a military daycare center in 1983 and 84. One parent has charged that her daughter was, quote, involved in a satanic workshop where there was a marriage to the devil and a dog's tail and back paw was cut and burned in front of her, unquote. In therapy, the girl said that she had been drugged and molested by 2 teachers. In 1985, children who attended the McMartin Preschool in Manhattan Beach, Los Angeles County, said they were involved in rituals that included black-robed adults who chanted and killed animals on the altar. One of the pupils said she was forced to drink blood. Some children also alleged that a McMartin teacher cut the ears off rabbits to scare them. Investigators raided the home belonging to the girlfriend of one suspect and found a pair of rabbit ears, a black cloak, a black cape, and black candles. Despite the allegations, the prosecution's case has been discredited by defense attorneys, and more than 100 of the charges initially filed have been dismissed. In 1984 and 85, 19 Bakersfield children reported that they had been abused, and many of them told stories of animal sacrifice, blood drinking, and church service, church in quotes, with prayers to the devil. Eventually, 77 adults in Kern County were implicated by children. Investigators, however, were unable to substantiate the children's charges of Satanism. Law enforcement officials say other cases have been reported in Illinois and in Miami, Florida, El Paso, Texas, Omaha, Nebraska, Carson City, Nevada, and Sacramento. Skipping down in the article, Sandy Gallant, Gallant, an intelligence officer with the San Francisco Police and one of the nation's most influential experts on cults, cautioned that many cases are proving unfounded. But she says there have been 60 to 70 solid, unquote, cases of ritual sexual abuse in the past few years nationwide. She and others have heard hundreds of children and adults, people who have never met and who live a continent apart, tell stories that are fundamentally the same. Quote, independently, the victims are describing incredibly similar circumstances, unquote, said Catherine Gould, a clinical psychologist in the Los Angeles district of Encino, who has counseled dozens of children who claim they were molested in rituals. Again, quoting, they talk about animals being mutilated and killed and having to drink blood, unquote, said Detective Kurt Jackson,
a nationally recognized cult expert with the Beaumont Riverside County Police Department. They talk about being put in boxes or coffins in mock burials. They talk about being forced to drink human urine and eat human feces. The biggest thing they have in common is that they say they are made to worship the devil, unquote. Gould, who is now counseling 20 children who apparently were involved in ritual abuse, regularly hears stories of cannibalism and child sacrifice. Many children report that they are photographed during the ceremonies, leading to the certainty among some experts that the rituals and sexual activities are sold for pornography and possibly used for blackmail. Repeating that last sentence. Many children report that they are photographed during the ceremonies, leading to the certainty among some experts that the rituals and sexual activities are sold for pornography and possibly used for blackmail. A number of things to talk about in this article as well. One of the things that the kinds of activities they're talking about there, the horrible sadism, the bestiality, having to eat feces and drink urine, those are typical of many of the kinds of activities described by Maury Terry in The Ultimate Evil. The Process people are solidly into that kind of thing, the animal mutilations, child sacrifice, and things of that kind. Now, during the phone-in section of last week's broadcast, among the motives of the kiddie porn and the videotapes and the snuff flicks we kicked that around with a listener. And one of the things that I mentioned at the time was that there are basically American politics is run by 4 Bs. Bullets, bribes, beds, and blackmail. And I voiced the opinion that among the things that, among the intelligence activities being covered by the process, quote unquote, were in fact political blackmail, that many people have bizarre sexual tastes, and that these kinds of things are ideal, meaning videotapes of this kind of thing are ideal blackmail devices. So this also is worth thinking about. Also worth thinking about the fact that, although we're not going to go into it here, you can find out enough about the child molestation case in the Presidio. There's a lot in the news, but a former Southern Baptist minister has been implicated in the case as well. And that's interesting because David Berkowitz began going off the beam, so to speak, the son of Sam Killer, while he was in the Army. And specifically, Berkowitz, who was of a Jewish background, converted to the Baptist faith and became a Christian fundamentalist, again, while in the Army. One wonders whether that in any way connected up with either some of the Temple of Set people or some of the mind control activities, which I suspect the process is a front for. Again, that's no hard connection by any means, obviously, but it is, as we like to say, food for thought and grounds for further research. We're going to take a short musical break now, then we'll come back and we'll deal with some more of these very disturbing activities in a few minutes. So again, we're going to listen to a little music. I'm going to take a little bit of a break. We will be back. Be ready to tape again, because we're going to be on this subject for a while this evening. We're now going to begin looking at some of the explicit Nazi elements of the Temple of Set and Michael Aquino, and we're going to take a look at this against the background of Nazism and the occult. Now, specifically, Nazism itself grew in considerable measure. We're not talking about the international geopolitical connections, the doctrinaire anti-communism, which won them the support of industrialists around the world, or things of this type. But we're going to begin taking a look at some of the more abstract philosophy that gave rise to Nazism. And it's worth noting that Nazism grew directly out of the occult, and we're going to talk about that. Now, first, let's take a look at some of the explicit Nazi practices and inclinations of the Temple of Set. Reading now from the San Francisco Chronicle of Tuesday, November 3rd of 1987. It's an article by John Whittinger, Whittinger, and Bill Wallace, headlined, Army Says Constitution Lets Satanist Hold Top Secret Job. And we're not going to read the whole story, we're going to skip down. According to Temple of Set literature that Aquino acknowledged writing, the active reserve officer believes in a coming apocalypse in which only followers of Satan will be saved. Quote, for mankind now hastens toward an annihilation which none but the elect may hope to avoid. He has written in The Book of Coming Forth by Night, unquote, a work of Satanist scripture. And Aquino also has conducted occult rituals patterned on ceremonies conducted by Nazi leader Heinrich Himmler in a German castle once used by the Nazi SS for black magic ceremonies during the Third Reich. Nazis considered the black arts and satanic worship part of an ancient Germanic tradition. Aquino, in his book Crystal Table of Set, writes that he performed the rituals to recreate an order of knighthood for followers of Satan. He has encouraged his followers to study the beliefs of the Nazi terrorist group the Vehm, spelled V-E-H-M, and the Thule Gesellschaft, and the Ahnenerbe, two fanatic right-wing Aryan groups that existed before and during Hitler's reign. Tula Gesellschaft, by the way, is spelled capital Thule, capital Gesselschaft. Ahnenerbe is capital Ahnenerbe. The article goes on. Aquino, who makes no secret of his involvement in satanic worship, told the Chronicle, quote, "We are here for people who are seriously interested in the philosophy. We realize that many people are apprehensive about this. People fear what they don't understand, and because they fear it, they can also work up horror stories about it." During an interview in St. Louis, where he is now stationed, Aquino gave the Chronicle a copy of the Crystal of Set, a collection of writings from the Temple of Set which serve as the organization's Bible. The book contains descriptions of the use of, quote, lesser black magic, unquote, and greater black magic, unquote, and classifies temple members into various orders, such as the Order of the Vampire, the Order of the Trapezoid, and the Order of Bast. A passage describing the Order of the Vampire says members of the temple will study such legendary vampire powers as invisibility. In fact, these same powers are possessed by Setians, the book says. Through our black magic, then, and in the ways that are special to the children of the night, we will further enhance and develop our powers, unquote. One section of the book contains a reading list for temple members on the subjects of fascism, totalitarianism, and magic, unquote. Again quoting, "Many of the techniques pioneered by the Nazis continue to be used and abused, generally in a superficial and ignorant fashion, by every country of the world in one guise or another," the book says. The magician, again quoting, "The magician who can recognize and identify these techniques and the principles behind them can thus control or avoid their influence as desired," unquote. The list refers temple members to such works as Mein Kampf, Hitler, the Occult Messiah, and the Occult Roots of Nazism. Army regulations state that security clearances can be denied to people who espouse subversive political views, but the temple stops short of advocating Nazism. I would interject, that I think is the opinion of the authors here. It doesn't seem to me they stop very short at all, and we're going to go into that. Again, continuing with the article, Aquino, quote, "has not tried to disguise his activity in any way," Rickson said. The fact that he is outside the mainstream of American religious beliefs, and he is clearly outside the mainstream, is not relevant. As I said, no doubt the kinds of activities that Satanists, these Nazi/Satanists engage in would be totally repugnant to many members of our national security establishment. However, it should be noted that, as this article indicates, I think all too clearly, there are others that will tolerate this thing very, very nicely. At the point is, his security status was reviewed, and he was not only his top security clearance was reinstated, but he was given a promotion. Reading another section of the article, Aquino, a psychological warfare officer who has worked in military intelligence, holds a top-secret security clearance that allows him to handle information whose release would, quote, gravely, unquote, damage U.S. security, according to Defense Department regulations. He maintains the clearance even though he has performed Nazi occult rites and has described himself as the Antichrist in literature published by the Temple of Set. So again, it's fairly disturbing, but apparently there are people within our national security establishment, and apparently some in a controlling position, who do not find this kind of activity reprehensible at all. And indeed, one of the things we talk about so often on these broadcasts, the background of the Galen organization, the paperclip scientists, it shouldn't come as all that surprising to see things of this type. Now, there are a number of things to bite on in this article. First of all, we're going to take a look at the occult ceremonies of the SS and Heinrich Himmler. A couple of other things to take note of here. Actually, three things. The VAIM. I was unable to find any reference to the VAIM, spelled V-E-H-M here. I suspect, since it's described as a Nazi terrorist group, that may be an alternate spelling or pronunciation of the FEMA, F-E-H-M-E. That was the traditional and ritualistic group which had been used by the Junkers to dispatch peasants who, in one way or another, or people who in one way or another threatened their hegemony in Prussia. Now, the Nazis then revived the Femic killings, as we looked at in Radio Free America number 10, and the Freikorps and Black Reichswehr killings were operating under a Femic cover. I suspect that the VAIM, V-E-H-M, and the FEMA are one and the same, but again, if anybody can find a reference to the VAIM, please let me know. I haven't found anything about it myself. We're also going to take a look at the Tula Gesellschaft and the Ahnenerbe. There's an inaccuracy here in describing the Ahnenerbe. It's described as a fanatic right-wing Aryan group that existed before and during Hitler's reign. In point of fact, the Ahnenerbe was the SS Ancestry Research Branch, and we're going to take a look at that. It was actually an organ of the SS. That's also worth noting in this article that, according to this Major Rickson, Aquino stops short of advocating Nazism. That's the interpretation of the authors and Mr. Rickson. He has his followers read Mein Kampf. I think that at least suggests that their analysis is theirs and theirs alone.